I grew up on a farm, on a working farm. My parents were both university-educated people who had decided, in part because my mother was a writer and taught writing, ran a summer camp, that they wanted to live in that way. And it was the kind of childhood that would have been fairly typical for the generation before me, but for someone born in 1957, it was somewhat atavistic. I mean, I fed animals, cleaned stalls, milked a cow, this sort of thing. Meanwhile, my parents, who'd both been to Vanderbilt University and were from the Nashville area, were friendly with people in the fugitive agrarian group who had taught there at an earlier time, particularly Alan Tate and Andrew Lytle. Later on, it occurred to me that their idea of going back to the land in the way that they did might have been somewhat connected to the agrarian ideology. I don't really know. I never asked them. But so I was really kind of reared on those ideas and in that way of life, and it made me different from most people that I knew. I went to they didn't put me in the rural school system. I was taken to town to top of the line private school. So I was getting very good education, but at the same time, the rest of my daily life was pretty much totally different from any of my schoolmates. My mother taught me to read when I was 4, which meant that during school I was always in the wrong place in the book. But I was a big reader at an early age, and at a very early age. I mean, before I was 10, I had an ambition to write, which I didn't really do much about seriously until the period right before my high school graduation, where I had a spontaneously collapsed lung, and I went to the doctor. The doctor was a family friend, and he said, "Well, here's your X-ray, and you have a choice. I can slam you in the hospital, and I'll put a tube in your chest, and you lie there for a couple of weeks, enjoying yourself as best you can, or you can go home, stay in your room for 2 weeks, don't exert yourself at all, don't climb stairs, and it'll probably reinflate on its own." I said, "I take option 2." But truly, after about 4 or 5 days, I the usual things that I did in my room had begun to pale a little bit. So having always wanted to write a serious short story, I sat down and tried to do it, and I produced a fairly bad draft of what about 2 years later would become my first published short story. I don't know if this is a model that's particularly helpful to aspiring writers or not, but I think in a way, if being locked in a room is not a bad way to get started, and if you look at the recommendations that writers do, more generically make, they include a component of that usually, I think.
Did you meet Tate as a
Yeah, I knew him. I knew him. He was a visitor at our house from the time I was quite small, and by the time I was in high school, I had some real understanding of, who he was. We went to some of the last readings that he was able to make, and he spent the last few years of his life in Nashville. I think I was in college then. I would visit him. He was always very kind to me. I think he may have even read some of my fledgling efforts back in those days.
Did he give you anything? It seemed like you had a lot of structure around you that gave you a sense of literary community or literary.
Well, there are a couple of other people in that beat should probably be mentioned. The novelist Madison Jones was a very close friend of my parents. He's more or less exactly their age. They were all in Vanderbilt at the same time, and used to kind of go around as a threesome. And we saw a lot of them. I was quite friendly with practically all of his numerous children at different stages. And his oldest daughter lived with her husband in a tenant house on our farm for several years when I was in high school. I spent a lot of time with him. And he was really the first flesh and blood breathing model I had for a living literary writer. And then Andrew Lytle, who's very kind of genial, generous man and a great teacher, was someone we saw a lot of, and who indeed read a lot of my work when I began to publish it, he having outlived all the other members of that generation by about 10 years, and he would talk to me about it in shockingly incisive ways. And I think he probably read and reported on probably my first 8 books, which was just wonderful.